it's a basic tenet of Buddhist teaching, and it only makes common sense when you think about it, that nobody exists on their own. The Buddhists call it interdependent co-arising. In other words, this is because that is. This dies, the Buddha says, because that dies. It's sort of a industrialized, westernized myth that people are individuals, separate from others. In fact, we get our genes from others, we get our influences from others, we're heavily influenced by our parents' emotional states, which means that our grandparents' emotional states, it means our great-grandparents' emotional states, by the society we live in, by both the limitations that society imposes or by the possibilities for liberation that society makes available to us. So we live in a context, and throughout our life, our brain biology is affected by interactions with society and other people, and that's been called interpersonal neurobiology. So to look for the sources of problems within isolated individuals and to forget their relationships is actually to completely miss the essence of what it means to be a human being. And that means that the type of society that we live in and the type of life experiences that we have in that society, the type of expectations that others have of us or we have of ourselves, what others do for us, what we do for others, and how we relate to them, have everything to do with our functioning as human beings, including the functioning of our brains. Now, when you look specifically at the opiate system, we have opiates in our bodies naturally. They're called endorphins, endogenous morphine-like substances, and the endorphins have a number of roles, including pain relief, including giving us a sense of pleasure and reward, but most importantly, in connecting us to other people. So the endorphins have been called molecules of love because they connect child to mother and mother to child and father to child and child to father. So it's those people who don't get enough of that love as children, actually, who develop a lack of endorphins, who then have to do opiates in order to feel okay. These are the people who are then more prone to become opiate addicts. Now, a family doesn't live in isolation from society. So fundamentally what it gets down to is that, as the Buddha says, the one is in the all and the all is in the one. So that each individual in the society represents either a triumph or a failure of the whole society. Addicts represent, in a very clear and troubling way, that attached and needy part of ourselves that continues to engage in behaviors that are harmful. And whenever we're judgmental of other people, and especially when we have strong feelings around those judgments, you can be sure that it's all about ourselves, that we're projecting our own self-dislike onto somebody else, and therefore we don't have to deal with it. We're just trying to shove those people aside so we don't have to look at ourselves. All the great spiritual teachers tell you not to judge, or at least to examine your own judgments. Jesus says at some point that in the Gospel of Matthew that any judgment you make of other people is fundamentally about yourself.
Universally, what is at issue is a breach of what in Spanish is called confianza, which I think is a great word, and it indicates a relationship of trust, of mutuality, of generosity. And the universal cause of sickness in the upper Amazon is a breach of this relationship of mutuality and trust and generosity.
First of all, the word addiction itself comes from a Latin word, addictus. And addictus was somebody who owed somebody money, couldn't pay it back, and had to become a slave to them. So addiction always implies slavery. Now, there are many addictions to our society. I define an addiction not as something substance-related specifically, but as any behavior that one craves, one finds some relief in, and yet it has negative consequences in the long term, but we continue or relapse into them despite those negative consequences. That, of course, includes drugs, but also includes shopping, sexaholism, addiction to power, addiction to wealth, addiction to violence, addiction to external relationships, addiction to work, anything that we try and use to fill the internal void can become addictive. Now, no less an authority than the former President George W. Bush said that America is addicted to oil. He's totally right. The addiction in this case doesn't mean the legitimate use of the product. It means the attachment to behaviors and products that actually are destroying the environment. I mean, there's the negative consequences, clearly as you can see it.
So in that sense, I think that is the kind of the central right relationship. It's odd even to ask the question, because you know what the right relationship is. You know how you are supposed to be relating to people. You know the social demands on you for being generous with what you have, for maintaining trust, for providing nurturance and support for your friends. I don't think that's anything you have to study.
How can you compare the emission of toxic substances into the atmosphere with the drugs that a person injects into themselves? Which is the greater harm? Which is going to kill more people? Which is going to cause more disease? Which is causing more disease already? And how is that different? And why are we doing it? Because we're addicted to the car culture. If you look at the case of the recent oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the company BP, British Petroleum, whose rig exploded and caused the oil to pollute and kill so much sea life and cause so much damage, those people had warnings. They had plenty of warning before it happened that there's something wrong with our oil rig. Repeatedly and documentedly so. Why didn't those executives do something? Because they're addicted to the profit. They were too attached to the profit. That was more important than human life. That was more important than the environment. That was more important than their own consciences. Well, that's an addiction. Cigarette smoking kills directly 5.5 million people in a year around the world. Now, that means that as many people die annually of legally marketed, manufactured, and advertised products as did in the entire Nazi genocide of Jews in Eastern Europe during the Second World War. And that happens annually. So every year we have a Holocaust. And people are profiting off it. And they know that they're killing people, but they're still profiting off it. Why? Not because they're evil, but because they're addicted to the wealth that they're going to gain from that tobacco. Our society is focused on the relatively few drug addicts. And our judgment of them is a complete displacement of what this society is doing in general to people and to the world.
There are two components to what you need to do to maintain right relationship in any culture. And the first is that you have to be able to speak honestly from your heart to the other person. And the other is you have to listen devoutly with your heart to what the other person is telling you. And you have to listen with your heart, because if the other person is speaking with his or her heart, that's the only organ you have that can hear another heart. So if you're speaking honestly from your heart, then generally what you say begins with the pronoun I. Because if I say, you, look what you did, I'm guessing what's in your heart. And I don't know until you tell me honestly from your heart.
It's difficult in the context of a society like this to really resolve the addiction dilemma, because the society itself is addicted to acquisition.